Leaders' questions. I call on Deputy Micheál Martin.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, Minister James Riley is assuring everybody that the health service is getting better, that waiting lists are getting shorter, and he assures us that patients who are waiting the longest for treatment are in fact being treated. Unfortunately, Tánaiste, the facts and the figures confirm that since taking office, the actual number of adults waiting for surgery in the country's hospitals has actually increased by a dramatic 40%. The latest figures show that there were 13,435 adults waiting longer than 6 months at the end of March, which is a damning indictment of the stewardship of Minister Riley. There are now more patients waiting for treatment over 6 months, over 8 months, over 9 months. Now, the Department of Health, when it was contacted in relation to this situation, have confirmed and say that it's due to severe pressures on emergency departments. Although this is another area which Minister Riley recently said is under control and getting better. And on the ground, the reality is that nothing could be further from the truth. For example, in the last 3 weeks alone, all elective surgery, except for paediatrics, has been postponed in Cork University Hospital. There's a daily email going out in that hospital, out to the wards, telling them to cancel all elective surgery. Now, this includes cardiac, orthopaedic and neurosurgery. And most shocking of all, it includes cases for the treatment of cancers. Now, consultants inform me that it is practically impossible to plan any elective surgery as the accident and emergency department is so busy. That hospital is finding it extremely hard to cope. There are 3 wards closed in that hospital alone. There are 84 wards closed across the country's public hospitals. And yesterday, there was 408 patients on trolleys in A&Es across the health system. And yet again, this is an area that Minister Riley says is under control. I would ask you, Tánaiste, is Minister Riley in denial? Is he living in some fantasy land? And would you accept that there are now severe issues facing the health service and that the centre within the health service can no longer hold? We now have 2,277 public beds closed in the health service. And elective surgery now, even in cancer cases, is being postponed as a result. Those are not my figures. Those are the figures from the INMO, the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organisation, which Minister Riley, when he came into office, said he would accept those as the official figures in terms of trolley count, bed closures, and so forth. So I want to put it to you, Tánaiste, would you acknowledge that the health service now is under an extraordinary strain and requires dramatic intervention by government to arrest the crumbling across the board of all aspects of the service it attempts to provide?
Thank you, Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, can I say that the priority of the government has been from the very beginning to unblock access and to improve the flow of patients, because the patient is our #1 priority. As set out in the programme for government, the Minister for Health established a special delivery unit immediately on foot of the government being elected. The aim of the special delivery unit is to unblock access to acute services by improving the flow of patients through the system. The government's commitment to improving access is clear, and it's in part of that is the reform of the hospital services. I think it's important that we're clear about the facts here. There has been a figure of 13,435 adults waiting for a planned procedure. That was quoted in the media, and Deputy Martin repeated it again this morning. I'm informed that that figure is incorrect. The actual figure that I have is 10,002 at the end of March, and that's published on the ntpf.ie website. Now, that is an increase on March 2011. It's an increase of 4%, not 40%, as you have alleged. However, it's not I think you also have to take into account, when you're looking at these numbers, not just the numbers who are on the list, but the period of time that they are waiting. And in March 2013, the median waiting time was 2.4 months, which was down from 3 months in March 2011. I might also mention that in July 2011, when the Special Delivery Unit was set up, there were a total of 6,277 patients who were waiting for more than 9 months for inpatient or day case treatment, and that was a legacy left by your government. By December last, there were just 109 patients who were waiting for longer than 9 months, and that is an achievement, I think, that ought to be acknowledged. However, we're not complacent. The progress does not mean that the problem has been solved. You asked me, is the health service under strain? The health service is always under strain, and what we are doing is addressing that strain, getting the length of time that people are waiting down, dealing with the situation on the ground. There has been an increase in the number of people presenting at emergency departments over the past couple of months. That, as Deputy Martin will know, is a seasonal phenomenon, and it is something that Minister Riley and the HSE are working to get down.
Thank you. Tánaiste.
First of all, could I put it to the Tánaiste that the first thing the Minister did when he came into office was to change the target groups. The internationally recognised targets for waiting lists was 3 months and 6 months. And he unilaterally said it's 12 months. He did that to massage the figures and to perpetrate a contract. That's what he did. Now, the SDU has refined his machinations to 9 months and over. And the reality is, the actual figures for 3 months and over and 6 months and over have rocketed over the last 2 years. And the issue in relation to trolley count over the last number of weeks has also rocketed. And there is a fundamental problem. It's more than just the service being stretched. I mean, you haven't commented at all on the reality that there's an email going around in a major acute tertiary hospital telling consultants and telling the wards not to do elective surgery. Now, elective surgery is life-saving surgery in terms of cardiac, in terms of neurosurgery, in terms of cancer. Well, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that should be happening. And there's a further 750 million lined up for cuts this year to the health service. I'm saying to you, I don't think the centre can hold within the health service.
Thank you.
The health insurance is unravelling, with thousands leaving every single week because of the situation there.
Thanks, Deputy.
The public hospital system cannot cope with the demand. This is what consultants, nurses and people on the ground are telling us. And I think it's important.
Deputy, would you put your question,
aside the spin
you're over time.
And all of that, and acknowledge that a dramatic intervention is needed by government to stand back from this, assess the crisis, and then work out a proper pathway to resolving it and ensuring that at a minimum, in what are difficult times, to provide a basic health service to our public and to ensure that operations that are needed are carried out for patients.
Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, let me deal with the issue of the number of patients on trolleys. At the end of 2012, there were over 20,000 fewer people on trolleys or had been on trolleys as compared to the end of 2011. It was an improvement of 24%. Up to the 5th of April 2013, there were 2,600 fewer people who had been on trolleys compared to the same period in 2012. Now, first of all, as I've said, there are strains on the health service, and particularly at this time of year. We know the period of time that we have come through, and particularly unseasonal period of bad weather. Winter time and winter weather does tend to put additional pressure on emergency departments and on the hospital system. The minister for no, wait a second. No. The minister. Nobody is saying everything is fine. As I've said, in the health service, there are always strains and demands on the health service, and the question is, how best do you manage them?
Thank you.
And the Minister for Health and the HSE is managing them as best he can. And if he needs to turn somewhere to get advice as to how to better manage them, it won't be to you, Deputy Martin, because you, of all people, who in the best of financial times, and you were Minister for Health, you and plenty of money available to you, you were not able to manage the health service, and you left a legacy of HSE and a legacy of mess in the health service that we are doing our best to clean up after you.
Deputy O'Quailon, please. Sorry, Deputy O'Quailon. I've called Deputy O'Quailon. Thank you.
Tánaiste, the Croke Park 2 deal negotiated by your party colleague Minister Brendan Howlin was overwhelmingly rejected by the public sector trade unions, many of whom are affiliated to your own party. As a former trade union official and a lifelong trade union member, you will fully understand that nurses, teachers, firefighters who rejected your deal did not do so lightly. They did so because they understand that the deal was bad for them, bad for their families, that it was bad for the public services in which we all depend, and that it was bad for our domestic economy. Yesterday, after its meeting, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions made it very clear that they would oppose any attempt by the government to unilaterally impose pay cuts through legislation. And yesterday, the Taoiseach refused to say whether he would respect the outcome of the union ballot, and he also refused to rule out legislating for pay cuts. So I want to put the same questions to you here this morning, Tánaiste. Will you, as leader of the Labour Party, respect the outcome of the trade union vote on Croke Park 2? Will you, as a lifelong trade unionist, oppose any attempt to unilaterally introduce pay cuts through legislation?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, as everybody is aware, just over 2 years ago, this government inherited the biggest financial and economic crisis ever facing this state. And we determined that we were going to fix the problem. We've made a lot of progress on that. We are now 85% of the way there. There is a remaining piece that has to be done. It's about 3 billion in savings in public expenditure. The pay and pensions bill of the state is about 35% of everything that we spend. So we took the approach that a third of the remaining savings that need to be made in order to fix the problem that we have should come from the pay bill. In negotiations, a set of proposals were developed, as we know, which provided for reductions in pay from those employed in the public service at the higher ends of the pay scales, and some additional working hours from those who are on the lower amount of working time. About 87% of employees in the public service who are on pay of less than 65,000 would not have their core pay reduced under those proposals. We felt that the proposals were fair and reasonable, but they have not been accepted in a ballot of trade union members. That's disappointing, but it is a reality. It is also, of course, a reality that the savings still have to be made, and that savings of 300 million in payroll needs to be made this year, and $1 billion between now and 2015. I think that what we now have to do is we have to reflect on the decision that has been made. We need to hear from the trade union movement about the reasons for the rejection of the ballot. Government will have to consider that. But I think it's important that we don't put at risk what has already been achieved. We are now 7 months from exiting the bailout. We could, if we hadn't done what we have done, and certainly if we had taken the advice from your party, Deputy O'Quillan, we would be 7 months from entering a second bailout. So this is a time when we shouldn't put at risk what has already been done, either by failing to complete what needs to be completed or by walking into conflict and confrontation. So this is a time for calm, reasoned, reasonable reflection on the outcome of the ballot, and that's what the government is going to do.
Thank you. Deputy O'Quillan.
Well, very, very clearly, Tánaiste, you haven't taken the opportunity to give clarity on your and your party's position in relation to the possibility of legislation to impose cuts on public sector pay. You have taken exactly the same position as the leader of the Fine Gael party, and I have to say I'm hugely disappointed because I fail to understand why you would continue to act as a crutch for a Fine Gael party whose policies very clearly you are assisting in implementing and that are very, very bad for the interest of the ordinary people. I ask you again to make it clear that no deputy of any party will be asked to vote in this House for a bill that would further punish low to middle income public sector workers who have already taken major pay cuts, and many of whom are struggling to pay excessive mortgages, to heat their homes, to provide for the education for their children, to provide for their healthcare needs. Tánaiste, that is the reality in which we are in. And talking about, what you have taken as a fallback position anytime Sinn Féin asks you a question about fairy tale economics. Let me tell you that the only fairy tale that I have ever heard coming from you in recent times, there's been a list of them, but the most clear one was either Labour's Way or Frankfurt's Way. That was surely one hell of a fairy tale.
Thank you.
And you have come up with many, many more. I ask you, Tánaiste, answer the question, will you give an assurance there will be no legislation to further cut public sector pay? And the answer must be either yes or no.
Deputy O'Quillan, you give the Sinn Féin game away too easily. Sinn Féin wants to play politics with this, and you've been wanting to play politics with this from the very beginning. Your spokespersons were out condemning the deal before your spokespersons had even read it. And now in the wake, Wasn't even published.
Now in the wake. Deputy O'Quillan and your colleagues, would you please reply to a question you asked? Thank you.
Now in the wake of the result of the ballot, you're more interested in how much of a hit you can score on the Labour Party than you are either in the public service workers or the interests of the country. Now, you did say, Deputy O'Quillan, that I have some experience, and many of my colleagues in the Labour Party have some experience of dealing with these matters. So let me give you the benefit of that experience. It is not the first time that an offer on pay or a proposed agreement has been rejected by trade union members. And what happens when that happens is that the trade unions concerned talk to the employer, in this case the government, about the outcome of the ballot. There is an assessment made. There is an assessment made of what are the reasons involved, and there is thought given to finding a way forward. The problem that the negotiations were aimed at addressing has not gone away. You might want to wish it away. That's the kind of fairy tale, fantasy type of economics that Sinn Féin promotes. You might think it can go away. It doesn't go away. The reality is The reality is,
could you settle down,
that additional savings have to be made, and that reality has not been changed by the outcome of the ballot. And what will now happen is there will be calm, reasoned reflection done on the ballot. The government will consider.
Sorry, would you please?
The government will consider what has to be done. And while we're doing that, you might tell us, because you proposed that on public service incomes of over €100,000, there should be a 100% cut. Would you legislate for that?
Thank you. Deputy Clare Daly. Deputy Clare Daly. Deputy Clare Daly. Deputy O'Quailon, please respect the rules of the House. Thank you. Deputy Clare Daly, without interruption.
Tánaiste, you've been in power now for 2 years. You've been resoundingly rejected by the people of Meath East, and now, of course, decisively rejected by the organised movement of working people. A union movement in many instances led from the ranks of your own members, who valiantly battled for you to try and convince workers of the merits of your attack on their wages and conditions. They failed utterly. An overwhelming majority of workers stood up to your threats. Threats, incidentally, enthusiastically championed and broadcast by your friends in the media. And yet, workers faced you down. An act of defiance that I have to say has served as a shot in the arm for all of your victims, the lone parents, disability recipients, homeowners, pensioners, because public sector workers demonstrated that there's a lot more of them than there is of you. They debunked the myth that it's not possible to take you on. And the reason for their defiance is simply that there's no more blood to be taken from that stone. And how could it be otherwise when a majority of public sector workers who earn between 23 and 45,000 euros have already endured a 22% pay cut, and you want to impose more on top of that. So I suppose the question I'm asking you is where you're going. The labour and trade union movement was built on solidarity and sacrifice. The ambitions of people like Connolly and Larkin wasn't just about defending wages and conditions, but it was about developing a vision of a better society which put the interests of ordinary people first. You have completely failed and abandoned that tradition. Over 100 years ago, in Minister Howland's Wexford constituency, future Labour TD Dick Corish led a strike in Pearse Foundries of 700 workers, a titanic strike for 6 months, which won union recognition, where workers were bludgeoned on the streets. People, Minister, what would these self-sacrificing heroes think of you? What would Dick Corish think of his county man, Brendan Howland, imposing pay cuts of 7% at the behest of international financiers? So, Tánaiste, my question to you is, since you don't believe in struggle and solidarity, is it not time that you did the honourable thing, follow the path of the tradition that you are now firmly in, and follow, like Michael O'Leary before you, go off and join Fine Gael and bring Minister Howland with you?
Tánaiste, thank you.
Let me tell you a few things, Deputy.
Well briefed on the Wexford situation.
Let me tell you a few things, Deputy Daly.
Sorry, will you please allow the Tánaiste to reply, please? Thank you.
Let me tell you, Deputy Daly, that the Labour Party has always stood for and stands by working people. And the first thing that is needed.
Sorry.
First thing that is needed. Fianna Fáil are in no position to laugh after the condition you left the country in. Please, whatever you do, please don't add insult to injury. You know, you left the country in ruins, and please don't scoff at what you have done, or indeed at the job that we have to do now to restore it. The first thing that working people need, Deputy Daly, thing that working people need is a job.
Will you please stop this nonsense? and allow somebody to ask a question and hear the answer. Now, please go ahead.
The first thing that working people need is a job. And that's why we have to fix this country's economy and its reputation and its banking system and its finances so that we will get the investment in this country in order to sustain jobs and to create more jobs. Secondly, the Labour Party has always believed in decent public services in this country, in access to health and to education and to the other public services that we need. But in order to have public services, you have to be able to pay for them. You cannot live in a fantasy world. You cannot live in a world of fairy tales where somebody else will come and pay for them. And that's why we have to fix the state of the public finances that we inherited, so that public services can be ensured into the future, and so that those who work in our public services and whom we respect can have the job security that they deserve. Now, this government put a set of proposals developed in negotiations with the trade unions. Those proposals have not been accepted. We now need to look at that situation. We need to look at it with the trade unions who represent those employees. It is a time for that to be done in a calm and a reasoned way, and it is not a time for you or anybody else to play politics with it.
Deputy Daly.
I think, Tánaiste, you've become so indistinguishable from Fine Gael now that you don't answer the question in the same way. The reality is that people have rejected the Labour Party clearly, and is it any wonder? Over 13,000 full-time jobs were lost last year. Youth unemployment is at 27%, despite the fact that 1,600 young people are driven from these shores every single week. You talk about alternatives. You put forward a deal which saw low-paid workers being faced with cuts between 3 and 11% on top of cuts they've already taken every other preceding year, while those at the top, former ministers on €135,000, were being asked to take a 5% cut. There are alternatives that have been clearly outlined, and you see, the problem for you now is you can try and tell the fairy tale of Eamon in Wonderland about how it's possible to magic out and squeeze blood from people who simply have nothing else to give. That's the message you've been given. This vote is a turning point, and you know it. Your backbenchers should know it. And I'll ask them a question over your head. Are they going to just try and cover their tracks to protect their seats, or are they going to join the ranks of the real opposition that is growing outside while you stay with your friend?
Let it left at 0.
Sorry, I called it Tánaiste. I won't ask people to stay quiet once more. I'll suspend the sitting. This is going to stop. Now, please allow the Tánaiste to answer without interruption. And I'm serious.
We do have a huge problem of unemployment in this country. It's not true that the numbers of people at work reduced last year. They actually increased, Deputy Daly, but that's not. No, that's not. I'm not.
Sorry, would you ignore the side comments, Tánaiste?
There is a huge problem of unemployment. There is a very big, deep economic and financial problem that we inherited at the time this government was elected. Now, there are, when you have problems of this scale, you can either rant and chant about them as you do, or you can try and fix them. And that's what the Labour Party is. That's what the Labour Party is in government to do, and that is what we are doing. Let's take the issue of youth unemployment. You're right. We have a very high level of youth unemployment in this country. It's far too high. Far too many young people who cannot get jobs, young people coming out of college and university who can't get the kind of employment that their qualifications justifies. Now, you can go on shouting slogans about it, or you can try and solve it. And that's why the Labour Party put on the agenda the idea of a youth guarantee through the European Union. That's why we succeeded in negotiating a package of €6 billion to support it, so that we can put in place, practical measures in order to resolve those things. That is why, for example, we work so hard to try and attract investment into this country in order to provide the employment for young people coming out of college. But you know, it's quite remarkable that you can go through constituency by constituency. And where will you find the ultra-left? You will find the ultra-left opposing every single proposal for industrial development, for the location of industry. I have an example of it in my own constituency, where a proposal by a company to provide additional employment is being actively opposed by your colleagues on your benches. So, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't chant and rave and shout slogans about youth unemployment and then oppose every single measure that is taken, whether it is correcting the public finances or whether it is locating a particular industry in a particular area which is trying to solve it. The difference, you and I, Deputy Daly, Deputy Daly, share the concern about the level of youth unemployment and the problems of working people in this country. But the difference between you and I, Deputy Daly, is you shout slogans at it and I work in government to try and solve it.
That completes the